Here we go, guys. Welcome back, chess fans, to another recap. This is day 6 at the Superbet Chess Classic, a classical event held in Bucharest, Romania, that includes pretty much the best chess players on the planet, except Magnus Carlsen, who will be playing in the next stop of the Grand Chess Tour. In day 6, we have a big clash. Fabiano Caruana with the white pieces against Alireza, aka Gucci Reza Firouzja. Fabiano is on 3.5 out of 5 possible points. He's leading the event. Alireza following closely behind, only half a point behind, with 3 out of 5 points. So this one is a ridiculously important matchup. Let's see what happened. Fabiano Caruana with the white pieces, Alireza with the black pieces. Fabi decides to start with c4. Fabi has been trying some d4. c4 is a very intriguing option indeed. c6, of course, black can play knight to f6, black can play c5, black can play e5 or e6. Basically, black can touch pretty much any single piece and move it wherever he wants. So Alireza decides to go c6. Knight f3, d5, and now a g3, inviting black to just simply take on c4, because generally whenever black already has the pawn on c6, whenever you take on c4 and let's say you go knight to a3, you can just simply play b5 in this position and defend it. Defend the pawn on c4 because you already have a pawn on c6. At the same time, once you play b5, obviously that kind of weakens this long diagonal and you will suffer some consequences later on in the game. Let's see what happened. Alireza decides not to take on c4. He plays the move g6. Makes a lot of sense. This is one of the topical lines of this variation. Queen to a4. And now this is quite an intriguing line because an immediate, not necessarily threat, but an immediate threat to change the structure and change the potential ensuing middle game arises on the board. Because generally, whenever you play c6 and d5 in combination, these two moves, you are ready to take back whenever white takes on d5 with the pawn. Now, what queen a4 does, and this is one of the only reasons behind this move, queen to a4, is that once you take on d5, black will no longer be able to take with the c-pawn because the c-pawn is going to be pinned. If you do go knight d7, for example, well, sure, that's okay. But right now, I take on d5, and then your knight is no longer on b8, doesn't have the very natural spot c6. And this is considered to be a little bit unpleasant for black. So Alireza decides to take on c4. Queen takes e4, a bishop to g7, d4, and bishop to e6. And queen to a4 goes back. Queen a4, you can play queen to c2, you can play queen to d3, you can do a lot of these things. But the queen on a4 is, at least for the moment, stopping black from going queen to a5 check. Bishop to d5, knight to d2, you have to defend this knight because, for example, if you go bishop to g2, I can just simply take on f3 and then follow that up by taking the pawn on d4. So knight to d2 defends the knight on f3. If you take on f3, I take back with the knight, defending at the same time the pawn on d4. Makes a lot of sense. Knight to f6 and queen to c2. Queen to a5. Queen to c2 is pretty obvious what he wants, what Fabi wants with this move. It is to support the move e4 and take advantage of the fact that this bishop on d5 is not necessarily best place in the position. It looks nice, but it could be subject to some various attacks, including this idea of e4. Queen to a5, pinning the knight on d2. e4 is no longer possible. Bishop to g2 and c5. Black needs to do something, and they need to do it fast. You can also go castle. The problem with castle is that I just simply castle, and once again, I'm reinforcing the threat of playing the move e4, and you're kind of in trouble right now. c5 does nothing anymore because I go e4, bishop to c6, and then I pass by with the move d5. I'm not forced to take on c5. I'm not forced to change the setup of my structure. So you don't want to see that on the board as black. You would, in fact, be in severe trouble if you do so. So Alireza, and by the way, he did mention in our post-game interview that he knew something about these lines. And he was just basically trying to remember what he needs to do. And he remembered quite well up to a certain point. Castle, take on d4, and b4. This is quite a nice little trick. Of course, taking on b4 would be absolutely and literally suicidal, because I would just go queen to c8 and the game is over. This is checkmate in one move, because your queen is no longer on the a5 d8 diagonal. You cannot go back and cover up the check. So yeah, don't do that. Kids, don't do that at home. Do not take poison pawns, especially when if you take it, you get checkmated in one move. Don't do it. Queen to d8, of course, defend the square c8 is what Alireza played. Bishop to b2. I'm not in a hurry to take on d4, and we will understand in just a second why. Because, in fact, you want to take it with the bishop. Castle, bishop takes d4, and knight to c6. Bishop to c3, rook to c8, and queen to b2. And right now, I was looking at this game live, and it just felt like white has achieved pretty much everything out of the opening, everything they ever wanted. They have more space on the queen side due to the fact that this pawn is very nicely placed on b4. I have ideas of potentially disturbing that knight on c6 with the move b5, but that's not the biggest problem that black is facing right now. Black, this is the biggest problem. The bishop on d5, once again, very nice central piece. The problem is it's going to get attacked. It's going to get disturbed. Rook to d1 is going to arrive on the board, and then you're going to have to find a place to put the queen. It's not that easy to find a place to put the queen. If you put it on the c file, I'm going to follow it up with the rook coming to c1. So you're probably going to have to hide somewhere behind this e pawn, but then what is this guy doing? The rook on f8. It's problematic. Let's see how the game continued. a5. Take on a5. I do believe that a3 and trying to maintain the pawn structure as is, keep this pawn on b4 would have been the better opportunity for white. But he decides to take on a5. Knight takes a5 and rook to c1. Knight to h5. Black needs to deal with this pressure on the long diagonal somehow, and he decides to play it with knight to h5. Bishop takes a g7. Knight takes g7. Rook takes c8. Queen takes c8 and rook to c1. Still makes a lot of sense up to this point. And this is what I'm saying, that black is having some difficulties in the position. Not only that, but it's not a complex position. White, in fact, has very easy moves, very natural moves. You just exchange on d7, exchange on c8, take the open file with the move rook to c1. The last few moves have been very natural. White is not yet doing anything out of the ordinary, and yet he's getting a pretty significant advantage. Queen to d8, knight to e5, take on g2, knight to e6, knight to f3, and this is a move that Alireza mentioned in the post-mortem analysis that he felt it was not the right move. The problem is it's not easy, once again, to find the best moves. f6, sure, this is what the engine is recommending. At the same time, it's not an easy move to make for various reasons. The most obvious being that, you know, it weakens the king. It weakens this a2 g8 diagonal. And at some point, maybe I can put something on that diagonal, put the queen on that diagonal, and create some disturbances against the black king. So f6, not an easy move to make. Maybe you can go queen to d6, but yeah, sure. Good luck trying to understand the differences between the queen being on d6 and the queen being on d5. To my eyes, to my understanding, the queen on d5 looks much better. Yeah, I mean, you're pinning the knight on f3, not allowing it to create any problems. You're also keeping an eye on the pawn on a2, and you're covering up this a2 g8 diagonal that we discussed could potentially be problematic. Also, you're defending the pawn on b7. So queen to d5, centralize the queen, makes the most sense to my eyes. Rook to c3. This was a very good move by Fabi, trying to disturb the queen on d5 with rook to d3. Also, ideas of rook to a3 and put pressure on the knight on a5. So this is the way to improve the position for white. Rook to a8, rook to d3, and queen to c5. Finally, the queen has been disturbed, has been thrown off the long diagonal. Queen to c5, rook to d7, invade, rook to e8. Good move by Alireza, defending the pawn on e7. This is the most difficult thing to do for black in this position, is to just sit and wait and just defend whatever it's being attacked by white. It's not a pleasant thing to do, and this is where the champions are at their best, having and showing that patience that they've developed throughout the years at the elite level. It's easy to attack, right? It's always easy to go forward, to attack, throw pieces, sacrifice. It's never pleasant, and it's never easy to defend this type of unpleasant positions in which you simply don't have any counter chances. This is a position in which white plays for two results, a win for white or a draw. So very unpleasant. Nevertheless, Alireza is showing his mettle in this one. Is showing that he has the experience necessary to defend this type of positions. a4, knight to c4, knight takes e4, queen takes e4, and queen to b5. Of course, you can take on b7 with either the queen or the rook, but that's going to allow me to take on a4, and that's not going to be enough. You can also take on b7 like this. Take on e7, take on e7, take on e7. You're going to be a pawn up. The problem is the material has been extremely limited right now. And if we exchange the queens, this is considered to be a theoretical drawish endgame. So, sure, pawn up, slight advantage for white, not enough. Let's get back to it. Queen to b5 was played by Fabiano. Queen takes b5, a takes b5. And now, something very interesting. Alireza said that he thought that he's losing at this point in the game, which to my eyes, sure. I mean, I understand that he's much worse. The engine understands that he's much worse. But losing, well, that's a completely different feeling to have. And rook to b8 would have been a very good move in the position. Rook to b8, just give up the pawn on e7 and then try to play like this. King to f8, put some pressure on the rook, force it to go off the 7th rank, which is where the rook is at its most annoying for white. Rook to d7, king to e8, and if you do go knight to e5, try to maintain the rook on the 7th rank, well, f6, and that's problematic. You cannot do that. So, going back after king to e8, probably you have to drop back to d2, but then I can just create my own counter chances. I can go rook to c8. I can maybe even consider going rook to d8 because my king is so close to the b pawn. So for example, if I go rook to d8 and you exchange king to d8 and then my king runs to b6, your king is a bit too far. Despite the fact that you're a pawn up, this seems to be more or less okay for black. So this was Alireza's best chance. Knight to c5 was the move that he decided to play. Rook to c7, b6, and knight to e5. And now, I have to say, from a practical perspective, the position is getting extremely, extremely difficult for black. Fabiano is putting a lot of pressure on the young Frenchman right now. Knight to c4, attacking the pawn on b6, you have to defend it. Knight to a4, defends the pawn on b6, and knight to e3, a very good move, redirecting this knight to a more active position. So on c4, it was attacking the pawn on b6, but why don't I take it all the way to the center when I'm going to attack two pawns, e7, big weakness in the position, but also b6. So with the knight on d5, I'm going to paralyze both of your major pieces in the position, except the king, of course. That is the rook on e8. So, for example, if you go king f7, I go knight to d5, the rook on e8 cannot move anymore because you're going to lose the pawn on e7 either via knight takes e7 or rook takes e7. You cannot move the knight on a4 because you're going to lose the pawn on b6. And if you do go king to e6, then I just simply go e4, and that's going to secure my knight on d5. It's not looking good. Sure, the engine, I think, wants to give up a pawn. I don't remember exactly how, but it does not matter. From a practical perspective, this position looks really, really bad for black. So Alireza decides to gamble. He plays the move e6. That is pretty much a gamble. He understood that he's much worse. He understood that he's on the verge of losing this game, and he decides to put some pressure on his opponent's clock. Because as you can see right now, Alireza, 58 seconds, and we are at move 35 against 16 minutes. But rook to b7, and Fabi spends 12 minutes on his move. Drops down to his last 4 minutes and 30 seconds on his clock. Decent move. Knight to g4 was also a very good move. Tried to make black's pieces even more passive. You have to defend the pawn on f6 with the move rook to f8, and now I'll give you a check. I'll force the king to go to the corner, box it in the corner, and then just push my pawns. h4, king f3, get the king to c4, push the pawns, e4, f4, maybe e5. Basically, it's just one of those positions in which your situation as black never improves. It's a very difficult position, borderline, I want to say losing from a practical perspective for black. Golden opportunity missed by Fabiano. He played the move rook to b7. It does not spoil the advantage, but perhaps knight to g4 was slightly more precise. Rook to c8, knight to g4, rook to f8, knight to h6. Finally, the knight is on h6. Knight to f7. King to g8, knight to d6. This knight is rerouting towards c4, perhaps once again. The idea of knight to h6 and boxing the king in the corner like this, and then just pushing the pawns and trying to take more space on the king side was likely the better decision. But once again, as you can see, Fabiano is dropping down to his last few minutes as well. He decides to go knight to d6, f5. At this point, Fabi has made the time control. This is move 40. The players are getting an additional 30 minutes on their clock. After the clock runs down, so after those last 20 minutes, 2 minutes and 20 seconds that you see on your screen run down, then Fabiano, for example, gets an additional 30 minutes. So what you can do, and what most players do, they just simply start walking around, they get some tea, they get pretty much ready for the next stage of the game, in which they will have to think of a new plan or how to continue the plan that they've been employing up to this point. Analyze the position, try to basically get deeper, understand it deeper on a deeper level, and make the right decision. What Fabi does is something absolutely inexplicable at this point, and I'm sure he's very disappointed about his next move. He plays the move knight to c4. And the way Alireza described it in the post-mortem analysis, he said that Fabi made the move, touched the knight, placed it towards the c4 square, and then dropped it back to d6. And at this point, he understood, I just touched the knight, so I have to move the knight. I don't have anywhere else to move the knight. If I go to c8, he eats it. e8, same situation. f7, f5, e4, everything is the same. You're losing a piece. So your only move in the position is to put the knight on c4. The problem is after knight to c4, the position, in one move, in one little moment of not paying attention, the position, well, you're simply just losing your advantage as white. And this is exactly what happened with the next move. So if you want to try and put yourself in Alireza's shoes and make the best move in the position, stop the video and comment the right move. Rook to f7. The game is over. Right now, this is a draw. There's absolutely nothing you can do as white. This is the worst position, the worst system and placement of your pieces that you can probably hope for if you want to play for an advantage as white. If the rook would be on the c file, I would be able to go rook to c6. Shy away from the trade of the rooks. But with the rook on the b file, you cannot do that. Rook to b8, rook to f8. I'm just following you. Rook to b7, rook to f7. I'm just following you. And this is exactly how the game ended. Rook to b8, rook to f8, and rook to b7. If you do want to trade and say that you have the better knight against my knight on a4, it does not matter, because you know what I'm going to play next move. I'm going to play the move knight to c3. I'm going to give you my pawn. I'm going to take the pawn on b5. This is 4 versus 4 on the same side. Absolutely no imbalance in the position. The game is over. So Fabiano played an exemplary game. This was just an incredible preparation, incredible choice of the opening, very good choice of the opening, putting a lot of pressure. I want to say impeccable handling of the middle game, just great handling of the middle game, slowly inching closer to an advantage as white, and then just throw it all away with this move knight to c4 in a moment of just your attention slipping away for a second. It's unfortunate. Fabi is definitely disappointed, but still, these are some encouraging signs, because he was able to get a very good game. He was able to increase his advantage, get a good position out of the opening, outplay his opponent. He's very young and very strong opponent, Alireza. But unfortunately, he was just simply not able to execute. These things happen. This type of accidents happen. There's still 3 rounds to go. And Fabi is still leading, because every single other game in this round has been drawn. Still ahead of the pack, 4 points. Everybody else on 3.5 points. 3 rounds to go. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video, which is going to be most likely tomorrow. See you guys then.